Shelman, warm welcome to EC First. Very excited, very humbled to have the opportunity for this private class on CMMC. Looking forward to the relationship and the collaboration. Mike and I, over the last, I think maybe 5+ years or whatever the time is, have been very consumed. We've kind of been married to CMMC right from the earliest versions, and we've been learning a lot together. Just looking forward to sharing some insight. The class that Mike is delivering, the CCP class, is really important because that lays the foundation. I think all of you, if not most of you, will probably at some point be performing sooner rather than later CMMC assessments. And as you know, after the CCP, the next class to take is the CCA class, where there is a lot more emphasis on the assessment. EC First, like Shelman, is a C3 PAO. Obviously, Shelman is a very large organization. Shelman does work on FedRAMP and CMMC for some very large clients and customers. What I wanted to do over the next few minutes, and I appreciate the opportunity to share, is to give you some insight about our journey as a C3 PAO and what we have learned in this process, because not only our objective when Mike is delivering this class is not only for you to understand the concepts, which I'm sure many of you are probably already familiar with and looking to take that CMMC body of knowledge a lot further, but also provide some real world kind of insight, words of wisdom, if you will, in terms of what we see when we perform these CMMC assessments. So we call it CMMC Unreadiness, and it's actually a much more comprehensive body of work, but I've just included 4 or 5 slides. So Mike, if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so right below the photograph, you'll see there are 3 logos there. Lead CCA, which is what I'm assuming ultimately you guys are aiming for. Mike and I are both PIs, so we can deliver CCP, CCA programs. And then obviously the class that you're taking right now will position you, once the class is done, for you to take the CCP exam. But those, in our opinion, are very valued credentials that I think in time will be even more valued, because there just aren't that many CCPs or CCAs or lead CCAs and all that. So a lot of opportunity ahead. And then, at the end of the class, when you guys are filling out the evaluation, don't forget to let Audra know about the t-shirt, "In God We Trust, the Rest We Audit." We're very excited about that. All right. Okay. So this slide looks very simple, but it's not. It took a long time for us to put it together. And I wanted to just draw your attention on the left circle, if you will. And right in the middle of that circle, you'll see it says assessment readiness. So as we come out of that, you'll see deficiencies, issues, and challenges. And so normally what we have seen with clients, and a lot of our clients, and that may be a little different between EC First and Shelman, because I know Shelman has very large clients and also maybe medium to large size clients, while we work mostly with small to medium sized clients. So our market may be a little different. But I think you may see some of the same challenges with organizations or the same deficiencies. So once you step out on the left side, you'll see several words like assets. And that asset inventory is something that's very critical when you're actually performing CMMC assessments, to understand, what are your CUI assets? Where are they located? How many physical sites, the cloud service providers, etc. The next one right next to it is policies and procedures. So I wanted to just draw your attention to that. So there are some numbers that are very important with CMMC. And Mike has been talking about the class. So when you think of CMMC, it comes down to 3 sets of numbers. 14 domains, as we all know, right? 110 requirements or practices, right? And then 320 requirement objectives, or also referred to as assessment objectives. So those 3 numbers are the pillars of CMMC. When you are performing an assessment, it's very important to verify, make sure that the BOE, the body of evidence that you're going to be looking at as a part of the assessment team, CMMC assessment team, that those 14 domains have been addressed, the 110 controls or requirements have been appropriately addressed, and really where the rubber meets the road is that magic number. The secret sauce or the magic number with CMMC at level 2 is 320. So every one of those 320 objectives or requirements must be addressed in what? In your policies, in the procedures, in the evidences. Also, all of this referred to as the body of evidences. And another term that's used in the CMMC vocabulary is artifacts, right? And what brings all of this together is the graphic that's on the right side, which is the system security plan. So the system security plan, I think of it as a pointer to everything in CMMC. So one of the first things that when Mike and I, because Mike and I are both lead CCAs, we've been involved in a lot of CMMC assessments. That's what we do. We don't have a life. We live, breathe, drink CMMC. We're very passionate about it. And the first thing we like to do is we like to, just to get a sense, the organization comes to us, says they're ready. They've done everything, they're ready. And the first thing we ask them is, can we take a quick look at your system security plan? And really, it doesn't take more than 15 to 30 minutes to just kind of thumb through it, browse through it, to take a look at, yeah, this looks pretty good. I mean, we can see the detail. Or where is domain 12 and where are the requirements for domain 9? Is it well organized? So I always use the phrase, the system security plan must be crafted with surgical precision. We don't want, an ISO 27001 or a PCI or whatever other system security plan that's going to be modified, but still has a lot of overweight, so to speak. Keep it very focused on and organized for CMMC based on 14, 110, 320, because the ultimate objective is to get certified and make sure the assessment journey with the assessor is less challenging. So to continue on the left side, so policies, procedures, you gotta address. And we highly recommend, you're not required to do this, but we highly recommend to our clients that in your policies and your procedures, make a direct reference, because with every one of those 110, there's a requirement identifier or a practice identifier. So put that in there. So it's very easy for the assessor like yourself or myself or Mike to take a look at that and see, oh, this identifier is talking about this. Now, within a certain requirement, there may be one or more requirement objectives or assessment objectives. So those should be addressed in the policy. So I personally don't think, and you may disagree with me on this, but I personally don't think it makes sense to have 320 policies, because that's a whole lot of policies. I think it's not unreasonable to have 110 policies, or you could have 14 policies organized by domains, but I think 110 makes sense, where you have one policy per requirement, and that policy addresses all of the objectives associated with it. So right there on the left where we see policies and procedures, it's very important that those policies and procedures identify the requirement requirements, the requirement number, documentation, just keeping that very well organized. FedRAMP and shared responsibility. Access control is the very first domain. I'm assuming, Mike, you've already covered the access control domain. Lot of requirements under access control. That's where the assessment starts, because we always start, when we do our assessments, we budget a whole week after everything, all the preliminary work is done. And then we start with the very first one in access control, the domain, and then kind of work our way through it. Identity, system inventory, security operations, monitoring, incident response, another really important area, training awareness, kind of what's the organization doing with respect to that, FIPS and encryption, evidence and artifacts. So that's the whole body of evidence. I mean, it's not a complete list, but it kind of gives you, and those are the areas that have to be reviewed very closely when you perform an actual assessment. And so if the client is if you're guiding the client and they can keep things really well organized and it's aligned with the way the latest version of CMMC is 2.13, which is referred to as CMMC 2.0, I think that's important. Now, on the right side, the concrete and steel for CMMC comes down to the system security plan. So to me, that's a very important starting point, and it's kind of what brings together your whole CMMC program, if you will. So your network diagram, what's the system environment, what's boundary, scoping is so important. Where do you have CUI? What are the assets associated with CUI? Your security controls, also referred to as security protection assets, right? What are those? Your policies and procedures. So the system security plan should not include the policies and the procedures, but it should identify what are the policies and procedures associated with those 14 domains, 110 controls, and where are the requirement objectives addressed. So all of those artifacts should be clearly identified. So I know for us, when we are looking at a system security plan and we are looking at, okay, what's the name of the policy that addresses this domain or this requirement? Give us that policy information. What about the procedure? And what about the associated implementation evidence? That's very important. Those are all collectively referred to as artifacts. Now, every word, and we don't have enough time here, but every word in here actually comes out from our assessments that we felt the client had not done as good a job as they could have or should have in terms of getting ready for the actual assessment. So we're always fine-tuning and refining this slide based on all of the assessments that we are in fact performing. But I think you'll find this slide to be a good reference. The client feels like the system security plan is really well done, everything is articulated well, it's well organized, what have you. But then you can look at some of the gaps or the deficiencies or the challenges associated with the system security plan. So right at the top, and all of the information that's in the circle, scope and content clarity, not really the scope of the engagement or the scope of this assessment has not been appropriately addressed. Your artifacts and your evidences, those should be clearly pointed out. What are the assets that are in scope, not in scope? That's really important. Those are some of the areas that organizations have to pay attention to when they're looking at the system security plan. The scope definition and alignment, as you see in the top right, it says the scope description is unclear because it had not been articulated clearly in the system security plan. The descriptions are addressing some but not all objectives. Now, it's very important, out of the 110 controls, it may be some controls are just not applicable, right? But you got to point that out clearly. You just can't skip those controls. We've seen some clients do that because they felt this is not in scope, so we didn't address it. Well, you need to address all of them, and you can put in not applicable and the justification for why it may not be applicable. Systems reference may be outside of scopes. Description may only cover some of the applications in scope. So that's where the client and yourself have to really make sure that whatever is in scope, once the scope has been identified, is being appropriately addressed in the following 110 controls and 320 objectives. As you go on the right side, you'll see there's a box that says incomplete supporting materials. And so artifacts, policies, or procedures are not named appropriately or referenced appropriately. So it becomes much more challenging to find out, okay, where is this being addressed? Which policy is addressing it? And it may not be a bad idea. Again, you're not required to do this, but I like to keep things simple. I think things can get very complicated very quickly. It's not a bad idea just in the policy, maybe even have the identifier in the policy file name. So it's very easy to map back to that policy that may be within a certain domain. inaccurate visual representations where diagrams show out of scope assets, right? Diagrams refer to in scope items, but somewhere else in the body of work, those are referred to as out of scope. We've seen that a lot of inconsistency where evidences are being provided that are not relevant. Or the diagram may include assets that are not relevant to CUI. So I think it's very important that clients are guided to make sure that there is surgical precision with respect to all of the information. So I think that precision is important, along with making sure that whatever is in fact, the scope lays the foundation, and whatever is in scope is in fact appropriately being addressed in that body of evidence. And the body of evidence, like I've mentioned, it's three pillars: your policies, your procedure library, and your implementation evidence. Now, on the left side, you'll see misalignment of processes and controls where there's inconsistency. You're saying something in the system security plan, but that does not align with the actual procedures, right? And we've seen that a lot when organizations are addressing, many organizations have multiple compliance and cyber and security standards that they're trying to address, including ISO and NIST and PCI and SOC and others. And I think that's where you see where there may not be consistency with respect to how CMMC is organized. And everything in CMMC, as Mike has been mentioning, is based on NIST Special Publication 800-171 R2. And so that really is how you want to make sure everything is organized with respect to. And then missing mandatory documentation, that's a big one. That's one that we see quite frequently where the network diagram is missing or incomplete or inaccurate. The CUI data flow diagram is really important because the heartbeat of a CMMC engagement is your CUI, right? Where is this CUI? Where is it resident? Where is it being stored, transmitted, and all of that? The change history associated with your boundary descriptions, inventories, customer responsibility matrix. I'm going to refer to that on my next slide. And then really important is satisfaction of each and every one of the 110 requirements and 320 objectives, even if some of those may not be applicable. So if they're not applicable, state it in the system security plan. It's not applicable and why it's not applicable. The justification is really, really important. So this is our secret sauce, so to speak, when ecfirst is performing as a C3PO and assessment. And so, as you can see, this is all based on the formal CAP document that Mike is going to be talking to you about a little later in this week. But I wanted you guys to just have visibility in terms of what does the actual workflow look like from the perspective of CMMC. Because our objective when we deliver our classes is not for you to just only have the body of knowledge so you can pass the exam. We know you're going to do that. You're going to do well. I think it's also to prepare you and provide you with some insight in terms of the actual assessment workflow. So here you can see, and all of this comes out from the official CAP 2.0 document, right? So this is just a visual representation of that information. But the journey always starts with the top middle where it says preliminary, right? Where your organization, Shellman, may have received a request for a CMMC assessment from an organization seeking certification. There's communication happening between yourself, your organization, and the OSC. What's the entities to be assessed? Framing. Mike's going to be talking a lot about scoping and framing. And trust me, in the CCP exam, you are going to see questions on these two particular words: scoping, framing. Understanding that is important. Identify and manage the initial conflict of interest and execute the contractual agreement. So that's your preliminary body of work. Then you move on to what we call conduct, which is phase one. And phase one, the journey starts with the SSP. You can see it's at the top of that list. And as you gain more experience with CMMC assessments and you perform more CMMC assessments, I think it becomes very easy to see very quickly how ready, like I said, the client is with respect to their CMMC assessment readiness. So the SSP tells you a lot about the quality of the body of evidence from the OSC. Availability of evidence, the readiness for assessment, who's going to be on the assessment team. I know at ecfirst, when we are doing these assessments, we always have at least 3 lead CCAs on every engagement. You're not required to have 3, but that's what we do. And that's just so that we want to make sure there's very high quality work, and we are cross-checking each other as we are reviewing the materials that have been provided. And then one of the key things you'll see in the phase 1 box, and Mike really spends a lot of time with the EMAS system, which is uploading. One of the key things there is uploading the pre-assessment form information into EMAS. And then we are at that point, phase 1 is really important, because if you're satisfied with phase 1, everything is trending good, that's when you get into phase 2. We have an engagement that's going on right now as we speak, and we just informed the client. I think, Mike, we did it last night, if I'm not sure. But we informed the client, we've reviewed everything that they've provided for phase 1. Mike did the work with the EMAS upload, and we are ready for the interviews to start. Our interviews always start for phase 2 on Monday morning, and we blocked the whole week for that. Multiple assessors are assigned to that. And during phase 2, that's when we are performing interviews. That's when everyone's blocked their calendars for the whole week, and we're conducting in-brief meetings, and meticulously your level 2 assessment guide, which is 200 plus pages, we're kind of going through every single one of the domains, every single one of the requirements, every single one of the requirement objectives, the 320 that I mentioned, to understand how and where they've addressed all of that, and is it met or is it not met, right? Because we want to make sure they either get to 110 met, or if there are some deficiencies that are acceptable, there could be a poem associated with it, we identify. We've done a lot of assessments. We had one client that received a conditional certification because they had some poem items, and then for poem items, you get 180 days to address those. And this client actually dragged it to 150 plus days. I was really nervous, like, come on, let's get this finished. But some people like stress. I can't take it. Not young anymore. And then after phase 2 is done, phase 2 is where there's a lot of interaction between the client and yourself as assessors. Phase 3 is where now it's all internal work. You at Shellman or whoever the C3PAO is now analyzing all that information that you've collected during the interviews. You're preparing all of the reports. You're uploading the certification assessment results into EMAS. Everything is kind of being buttoned up, and then there's an out-brief presentation that you give to the client in terms of it. And then phase 4 is where the certificate is generated. If they have passed, if they had some poems, it'll be a conditional certification. And so that's what happened. So that's kind of a visual, just to give you a good feel for the journey from start to finish. And for us, every organization is different, but for us, from the start preliminary to the very end, phase 4 typically takes between 8 to 12 calendar weeks of time. And there's some weeks that are really intense, like phase 2. Some weeks are really intense. And then there's some weeks that are relatively lighter. And a lot of it depends on how well organized and disciplined the client has been. This is a quote. I included this slide because this actually came from one of the lead assessors. It was not Mike, it was not myself. This was another lead assessor who was working on it. And this is a comment that came internally from the lead assessor, that the lead assessor observed an increasing number of inconsistencies, specifically the system security plan marks controls as not applicable, while the OSC implementation statement indicates that IT performs these controls. And then additionally, the CRM lists the controls as not inherited. So it was a lot of confusion in terms of, okay, which one is it? Is it not applicable? Is it not inherited? Is it applicable? Those are the type of things that, we got to just advise the client. Take a look at your system security plan, and in there, you got to be very clear, and the precision has to be at the requirement objective level, that these are addressed in these policies, procedures, and implementation evidence. And I would highly recommend, like I said earlier, the 5 naming conventions. Make sure the identifier is in there. You don't have to do it, but just makes the job less challenging. Or if it's not applicable, state it's not applicable, and then don't be providing evidence to show it is applicable, because that's just going to cause a lot of confusion and delays things. So consistency is really important, tying everything back. So those are the 2 points. Consistency in your documentation as far as the client is concerned, critical. And then making sure that there's complete alignment between the system, what is being said in the system security plan, because the Bible is a system security plan. We're always going back to the system security plan to cross-check. And then that cannot be inconsistent with the policy information or the procedure or the other artifacts that may have been provided. We've also spent a lot of time, and this is the last slide. We've also spent a lot of time, and we're constantly updating it. We've got the CMMC playbook. All of you do have access to it. I know Audra has been working very hard with everyone that's here to provide support for the class and all of that. But do take a look whenever you get a few minutes at the CMMC playbook. I know I myself, I know this stuff inside out, outside in. I lead a very boring life. My life is centered on CMMC. It's the heartbeat. But there's a lot of information here. If you want to go to the source documents instead of Googling and trying to figure out, is that the one? Is that the older version? Is that the newer version? You'll find everything really well organized. We've got quick links on the top left, and then a lot of one-click links to very relevant documentation for CMMC. So we are very excited to have this program where all of you are together here with Mike and Audra, and we're looking at this as being the start of a long journey of collaboration together. Control your excitement.